Within hours of Marcus Williams leaving First National Bank, word began to spread through the city's business community. The story of how the bank's senior business manager had disrespected the mother of one of the region's most successful entrepreneurs traveled quickly through professional networks. Richard Chung wasted no time making his decision. He called an emergency meeting with his board of directors at Pacific Investment Group, and by the end of the day, they had officially removed First National Bank from consideration for their primary banking relationship. The news reached Patricia Hawkins, president of First National Bank, late that evening. She was at a charity gala when her assistant called with an urgent message about a potential crisis involving the Pacific Investment Group account. Patricia excused herself from the event and called Marcus Williams directly. She had dealt with him before on smaller transactions and knew his reputation in the business community. When she heard the full story of what had happened to his mother, she was appalled. "Marcus, I cannot express how sorry I am. This behavior is completely contrary to everything our bank stands for. Patricia, I appreciate your call, but this isn't about apologies anymore. This is about character. Your employee showed his true character today, and by extension, he represented your institution's character." Patricia knew she was fighting an uphill battle. Marcus Williams was not just wealthy and influential. He was respected throughout the business community for his integrity and ethical standards. If he spoke out against First National, other major clients might follow his lead. The next morning, James Morrison arrived at work unaware of the storm brewing around him. He had spent a sleepless night worrying about his encounter with Marcus Williams, but he hoped the situation might blow over if he handled it carefully. His assistant looked nervous when he arrived. "Mr. Morrison, Miss Hawkins wants to see you in her office immediately." Patricia Hawkins was not alone when James entered her office. The bank's chief operating officer and head of human resources were also present, their expressions grim. "James, sit down," Patricia said without preamble. "We need to discuss what happened yesterday with Margaret Williams." James had prepared a defense, ready to explain that he had simply been following proper procedures for verifying new business accounts. But before he could speak, Patricia continued, "I've spent the morning reviewing the security footage from yesterday's incident. I watched you throw an elderly woman's identification card on the floor. I watched you treat a potential client with disrespect and condescension, the security footage." James had forgotten about the cameras in his office. There would be no way to deny or downplay what had happened. "Patricia, I can explain. You can explain how you cost this bank a $5 billion account? You can explain how your prejudice and arrogance may have damaged our reputation beyond repair?" The number hit James again like a physical blow. In his 15 years of banking, he had never seen an account that large. The commissions alone would have been enough to secure his financial future. $5 billion? He whispered. Pacific Investment Group was prepared to make First National their primary bank. They were going to move their entire operation here. Marcus Williams was going to recommend us based on our previous professional relationship. The head of human resources leaned forward. James, in addition to the financial impact, were facing a potential public relations disaster. "Mr. Williams is highly respected in the business community. If this story becomes public—" "It already is public," Patricia interrupted. "I've received calls from 3 other major clients this morning, asking if the rumors about our customer service standards are true." James felt his world collapsing around him. "What can I do? How can I fix this?" "You can't," Patricia said simply. "The damage is done." Margaret Williams deserved to be treated with respect regardless of her appearance or background. "You failed at the most basic level of customer service?" The chief operating officer spoke for the first time. "James, we're going to have to let you go, effective immediately." "Please," James said desperately. "I've worked here for 15 years. I've brought in millions of dollars in deposits." "One mistake." "This wasn't a mistake," Patricia said firmly. "This was a choice. You chose to judge a client based on your prejudices. You chose to treat someone's mother with disrespect. Those choices have consequences." Security was called to escort James from the building. As he cleaned out his desk, other employees watched in silence. Word had already spread about what had happened and why he was being terminated. Meanwhile, Marcus Williams was in his office when he received a call from his mother. "Marcus, I've been thinking about yesterday. Maybe I should call that bank and try to smooth things over. I don't want your business to suffer because of what happened to me." Marcus smiled despite everything. Even after being humiliated, his mother was worried about him rather than herself. It reminded him why he had worked so hard to build his success. "Mom, you don't need to do anything. This isn't about business anymore. It's about principle." "But honey, I know how important these deals are." "Not as important as my mother's dignity," Marcus said firmly. "No amount of money is worth accepting disrespect toward the woman who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities." That afternoon, Marcus received a call from James Morrison. The former bank manager sounded desperate. "Mr. Williams, I know I made a terrible mistake. Is there anything I can do? Any way to make amends?" Marcus considered his response carefully. "Mr. Morrison, you're asking the wrong person. If you truly want to make amends, you need to examine why you treated my mother the way you did. Until you understand that you'll keep making the same mistakes with other people." "I understand now. I see how wrong I was." "Do you? Or do you just understand that your actions had consequences you didn't expect?" James was silent on the other end of the line. "Mr. Morrison, let me ask you something. If my mother had walked into your office wearing expensive clothes and jewelry, would you have thrown her ID on the floor?" "No," James admitted quietly. "Then you don't understand at all. My mother deserved respect because she's a human being, not because of what she might have been worth financially." The conversation ended there, but its impact rippled through the banking community. Other institutions took note of what had happened at First National and used it as a training example for their own employees. Pacific Investment Group ultimately chose Meridian Community Bank for their primary banking relationship. The smaller bank had impressed them with their commitment to treating every client with dignity, regardless of background or appearance. Margaret Williams never mentioned the incident again, but Marcus made sure she never had to handle business banking alone. He also established a scholarship fund in her name at the local community college, specifically for single mothers pursuing education while working multiple jobs. James Morrison eventually found work at a smaller bank in another city, but the story followed him. He learned to treat every client with respect, though it took him years to understand that the lesson should have been obvious from the beginning. The incident at First National Bank became a cautionary tale in business schools and customer service training programs. It demonstrated how quickly prejudice and poor judgment could destroy careers and cost institutions millions of dollars. But for Marcus Williams, the most important outcome was simpler. He had honored his promise to protect his mother's dignity, and he had shown that success comes with the responsibility to stand up for what's right, even when it costs money. 6 months later, Margaret Williams attended the grand opening of Pacific Investment Group's new headquarters. Richard Chun personally thanked her for raising a son with such strong principles, telling her that Marcus's integrity had been the deciding factor in their choice of banking partners. Standing beside her successful son, watching him address a room full of business leaders, Margaret felt proud of the man he had become. The incident at the bank had been painful, but it had also revealed the true character of everyone involved. As for First National Bank, they implemented new customer service protocols and diversity training programs, but they never recovered the Pacific Investment Group account. The $5 billion opportunity became a $5 billion reminder that respect and dignity are not just moral imperatives, but sound business practices. In the end, James Morrison's moment of prejudice had cost him everything, while Margaret Williams's quiet dignity had been vindicated by her son's success and her own unshakable character. Marcus Williams was in the middle of a board meeting when his phone buzzed with his mother's call. He normally wouldn't answer during such an important session, but something in his mother's tone when she left a voicemail made him excuse himself from the conference room. Standing in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Century Tower, Marcus looked out at the city skyline while his mother recounted what had happened at First National Bank. With each detail, his jaw tightened further. "He threw your ID on the floor?" Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. "Marcus, I've dealt with prejudice before, but this was different." This man looked at me like I was lying about everything, like I wasn't worth his time. Margaret's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the hurt underneath. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering all the times his mother had faced discrimination while raising him alone. She had cleaned offices at night so he could attend good schools during the day. She had endured countless subtle insults from people who judged her by her appearance rather than her character. He had promised himself that once he became successful, she would never have to face such treatment again. "Mom, I want you to go home and rest. I'll handle this." After hanging up, Marcus remained at his window for several minutes, his mind racing. He thought about the call he had received just 2 days earlier from Richard Chun. The CEO of Pacific Investment Group, Pacific, was preparing to establish a new headquarters in the city and needed a primary banking partner for what would be one of the largest corporate accounts in the region's history. The deal was worth $5 billion in initial deposits, with projections for much more as Pacific expanded their operations. Richard had specifically asked Marcus for a recommendation on which bank to use, knowing that Williams Technology Solutions had relationships with all the major financial institutions in the city. Marcus had been leaning toward recommending First National Bank. Their reputation for handling large corporate accounts was excellent, and he had heard good things about their commercial banking division. But that was before today. He walked back into the board meeting, where his senior partners were discussing the final details of their newest acquisition. Marcus was known for his calm demeanor and strategic thinking, but today his colleagues could see something different in his expression. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to make a phone call that will affect our current discussion. Please continue without me for a few minutes." In his private office, Marcus dialed Richard Chun's direct number. "Marcus, I was hoping you'd call. Have you given any more thought to our banking discussion?" "Actually, Richard, that's exactly why I'm calling. I've just learned something about First National Bank that I think you should know." Marcus explained what had happened to his mother, being careful to stick to the facts while making it clear how completely unacceptable the treatment had been. Richard was silent for a long moment after Marcus finished. "Your mother was treated this way while trying to conduct legitimate business?" "She was representing my company, Richard. She had all the proper documentation, all the financial statements. The manager didn't even look at the numbers before deciding she wasn't worth his time." Marcus, Pacific Investment Group has a strict policy about the companies we partner with. We expect our business associates to reflect our values of respect and integrity. If this is how First National treats potential clients, I understand completely, Richard. That's why I wanted you to know before making any final decisions. After the call ended, Marcus sat in his office thinking about the broader implications. His technology consulting firm had grown beyond his wildest dreams, but he had never forgotten the lessons his mother taught him about treating everyone with dignity and respect. Meanwhile, at First National Bank, James Morrison was feeling quite pleased with himself. He had just closed a major deal with a pharmaceutical company, adding several $1 million in deposits to his portfolio. He was already imagining how this would look in his year-end performance review. His assistant knocked on his door. "Mr. Morrison, there's someone here to see you. He says it's about the Williams account you handled earlier today." James looked up with mild annoyance. "I told that woman the meeting was over. If she sent someone else to waste my time?" "Actually, sir, this is Marcus Williams. He says he's Mrs. Williams's son." James paused. He had assumed Marcus Williams was either fictional or, at best, someone who ran a small local business. But the fact that he had come to the bank personally suggested there might be more to the story. "Send him in," James said, straightening his tie and preparing to handle what he assumed would be another difficult conversation. The man who walked into James's office was not what he had expected. Marcus Williams was tall and well-built, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than James made in a month. His presence filled the room with quiet authority, and his handshake was firm and confident. Mr. Morrison, I believe you met my mother earlier today. James suddenly felt less certain of himself. This man carried himself like someone accustomed to being taken seriously in business circles. Yes, well, there seemed to be some confusion about the documentation. No confusion at all, Marcus said calmly, taking a seat without being invited. My mother brought you legitimate business documents for Williams Technology Solutions. You threw her identification card on the floor. The directness of the accusation caught James off guard. Now wait a minute. I may have been a bit abrupt, but... Marcus placed a business card on James's desk. James glanced at it and felt his stomach drop. Williams Technology Solutions. CEO and founder Marcus T. Williams, Harvard MBA. The address listed was indeed in Riverside Hills. Mr. Morrison, my company has gross revenues of over $50 million annually. We're currently expanding into several new markets, which is why my mother was here to set up additional business accounts. James picked up the business card, studying it closely. The company logo was professionally designed, and the cardstock was expensive. This was clearly not some small operation. I apologize if there was any misunderstanding, James stammered, but Marcus held up a hand to stop him. There was no misunderstanding. You made a judgment about my mother and my company, based solely on her appearance and the assumption that someone who looks like her couldn't possibly be connected to a successful business. James felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Mr. Williams, if I could just explain... Let me explain something to you instead, Marcus said, his voice remaining perfectly calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. 2 days ago I received a call from Richard Chun, CEO of Pacific Investment Group. They're establishing their new headquarters here and need a primary banking partner. James's eyes widened. Pacific Investment Group was legendary in business circles. If they were coming to the city, every bank would be competing for their account. Richard asked me specifically which bank I would recommend for their needs. The initial deposit alone would be $5 billion. The number hit James like a physical blow. $5 billion would be the largest single account in First National's history. The commissions and fees from such an account would be enormous, and whoever landed it would be set for life. I have been planning to recommend First National Bank, Marcus continued. Your reputation for handling large corporate accounts is excellent, and I believed you understood how to treat all clients with respect. James felt the room spinning slightly. Mr. Williams, surely we can work this out. If there was any offense taken... Oh, offense was definitely taken, Marcus said quietly. When you threw my mother's identification card on the floor, you showed exactly what kind of person you are and what kind of institution this bank represents. Please, James said, his professional composure finally cracking. If I could just speak with your mother, apologize personally, ... Marcus stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. Mr. Morrison, my mother is 72 years old. She raised me as a single parent while working multiple jobs. She taught me everything I know about integrity, hard work, and treating people with dignity. The idea that she should have to accept your apology after the way you treated her is insulting. James watched his career flash before his eyes. Mr. Williams, what can I do to make this right? Marcus walked toward the door, then turned back for a final moment. You can learn from this experience. Maybe the next elderly person who walks into your office won't be connected to a $5 billion opportunity, but they still deserve your respect. As Marcus left the office, James sat in stunned silence, realizing that his prejudice and arrogance had just cost him the opportunity of a lifetime. But the worst part was knowing that he had earned every bit of what was about to happen to his career. Margaret Williams adjusted her worn but clean coat as she approached the imposing glass doors of First National Bank's downtown headquarters. At 72 years old, she had learned to carry herself with dignity despite the challenges life had thrown her way. Today was special. Her son Marcus had finally agreed to let her handle some of his business banking, and she was determined to make a good impression. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Margaret entered the pristine lobby. She had never been inside such an elegant bank before. Her usual banking was done at the small community branch near her neighborhood, where everyone knew her name and treated her with respect. This place felt different, cold, intimidating. Margaret approached the reception desk, where a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair barely looked up from her computer screen. "I need to make some deposits and handle some business for my son's company," Margaret said politely. Placing her identification card and a folder of documents on the counter, the receptionist glanced at Margaret's simple clothing and weathered hands, then at the community bank debit card she had placed alongside her ID. "Ma'am, you'll need to speak with one of our business managers. Please take a seat over there." She pointed toward a waiting area with leather chairs near the window. Margaret settled into one of the chairs, watching well-dressed customers move through the bank with ease. She noticed how the staff's attitudes seemed to change depending on who they were serving. Expensive suits received warm smiles and immediate attention. People like her received polite but distant service. After waiting nearly an hour, a tall man in his 40s approached her. His name tag read James Morrison, Senior Business Manager. His hair was slicked back, and his expensive suit was perfectly tailored. Everything about him screamed ambition and self-importance. "Mrs. Williams? I understand you have some business banking to discuss?" James extended his hand briefly, then gestured for her to follow him to his office. The handshake was limp, dismissive. As they walked through the bank, Margaret noticed other employees watching her curiously. She held her head high, remembering her son's words, "Mom, you represent our family wherever you go. Never let anyone make you feel small." James's office was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Awards and certificates covered one wall, and a large mahogany desk dominated the space. He motioned for Margaret to sit in a chair across from his desk while he settled into his leather executive chair. "So what kind of business are we talking about here?" James asked, his tone suggesting he expected this to be a waste of his time. He glanced at his expensive watch, making it clear he had more important things to do. Margaret opened her folder carefully. "My son owns a technology consulting company. He's been working with several major corporations, and we need to set up some additional business accounts for new projects he's taking on." James barely glanced at the documents she placed on his desk. Instead, he focused on her appearance again, taking in her modest clothing and the fact that she had arrived by bus rather than in a luxury car like most of his wealthy clients. "Technology consulting," he repeated with a slight smirk. "And what's the name of this company?" "Williams Technology Solutions," Margaret replied proudly. "My son Marcus started it 5 years ago, and it's grown tremendously. He now has contracts with several Fortune 500 companies." James picked up Margaret's identification card and the business documents, examining them with obvious skepticism. The ID showed her address in a modest neighborhood across town, far from the wealthy areas where most of his business clients lived. "Mrs. Williams, I have to ask... Are these documents legitimate? We see a lot of people trying to open accounts with false information." His tone had become condescending, almost accusatory. Margaret felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but she kept her voice steady. "Of course they're legitimate. My son is a Harvard Business School graduate and a highly respected entrepreneur. These are official business registration documents and financial statements." James leaned back in his chair, clearly unconvinced. "Harvard, you say? And he lives where exactly?" "He has homes in several cities because of his business travel, but his primary residence is in the Riverside Hills area." Margaret knew this was one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, but she could see James didn't believe her. "Riverside Hills," James repeated with a laugh. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion here. Perhaps your son does some small computer repair work and you've misunderstood the scope of his business?" The insult hit Margaret like a physical blow. She had raised Marcus as a single mother, working 3 jobs to put him through school. She had watched him build his company from nothing, seen him work 80-hour days to earn the respect of clients and competitors. For this man to suggest her son was nothing more than a computer repair technician was beyond offensive. "Mr. Morrison, I think you should look at those documents more carefully," Margaret said firmly. My son's company has gross revenues of over $50 million annually. James barely glanced at the financial statements. Mrs. Williams, with all due respect, these numbers seem unrealistic. Perhaps there's been some mistake in the paperwork. Margaret realized that James had made his decision about her and her son based purely on her appearance and the assumption that someone from her background couldn't possibly be connected to a successful business. The prejudice was so obvious it took her breath away. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor," Margaret said quietly. "That won't be necessary," James replied dismissively. "I can handle this myself." "Now, if your son really wants to do business with First National, he should come in personally with proper documentation and references from his current bank." Margaret watched as James picked up her identification card again, examining it as if it might be fake. His expression showed clear disdain, and she could see him questioning everything about her story. "You know what?" James said suddenly, his patience clearly exhausted. "I think we're wasting each other's time here." Without warning, he tossed Margaret's identification card toward her. Instead of landing in her hands, it hit the edge of the desk and fell to the floor at her feet. The room fell silent. Margaret stared at her ID lying on the polished marble floor, the plastic card looking small and insignificant against the expensive stone. The disrespect was so blatant, so deliberate, that for a moment she couldn't speak. James made no move to apologize or help retrieve the card. Instead, he began gathering the business documents, clearly preparing to hand them back and end the meeting. "I think this meeting is over," he said coldly. "Perhaps you should consider a community bank that might be more appropriate for your needs." Margaret slowly bent down to pick up her identification card, her hands shaking slightly with anger and humiliation. As she straightened up, she looked directly into James Morrison's eyes. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, her voice filled with dignity despite what had just happened, "you have just made the biggest mistake of your career." James laughed. "I doubt that, ma'am. I've been in banking for 15 years, and I know how to assess legitimate business opportunities." Margaret carefully placed her ID back in her purse and gathered her documents. "We'll see about that," she said simply, as she walked out of James Morrison's office. Margaret felt the eyes of other bank employees on her. Some looked curious, others seemed embarrassed by what they might have witnessed. But Margaret held her head high, just as she had taught her son to do in the face of adversity. Outside the bank, Margaret took out her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Marcus?" "It's Mom. We need to talk."